credit unions that are not really loan originators as much as they are your loan officers of banks. You know, don't have to basically have a complete licensing for every person at a bank. They registered because they're also already so highly regulated by the feds, and that was also deeply explained in the information I passed out last week. And that question is a little bit. Let's get this thing here. It goes into it on the next slide a little bit. The registered people are your loan originators that are employed by either an FDIC institution, such as a bank, savings and loan, or credit union, or a subsidiary owned by them. And your licensed is all other mortgage loan originators that must be state licensed. Again, we're following federal regs here. I love this computer. Some of your other mandates by the feds are all states must have a system of licensing in place for your residential mortgage loan originators by July 31, 2009. One of the things, the implications is if we do not pass these bills and these mandates, then HUD will come in and run our mortgage loan. And we'd be inviting HUD inside the state to run this. Either we do this or HUD will come in and take care of the entire system for us. And that's pretty much what we have to do. So we're accepting their recommendations or mandates. And our system must meet all of their definitions and minimum standards that includes the licensing of the mortgage loan originators. And further, that HUD determines the state mortgage loan originator standards that have to meet these mandates. The state has to participate in the program, and the program has to meet the SAFE mandates. And HUD will implement a system for non-compliant states. That's where I'm restating. If we don't have it, HUD will come in and implement the system for us if it's not in place by July of this year.
Chairman Hill, if you'll just for members of the committee too, I know several of you have questions. We're going to let Chairman Hill go all the way through his presentation, and then we'll ask questions when you get finished, if that's okay.
We'll come back, and because I might have to have the commissioner up here or Rod helping me with some of these answers. I think I've got them, but because they've been working with the feds over the last 6 months on this and battling it, they certainly might be a little bit more informed than I. And some of the other mandates there is the licensing provisions, which include education, 20 hours of pre-licensing education, and then 8 hours per year of continuing education. And they even tell how we have to break that down: 3 hours of federal law and regs, 3 hours of ethics, and 2 hours of standards for your non-traditional mortgage lending. The licensing standards: the person must never have had a loan originator license revoked. No felonies in the past years. And if you notice, there's a red asterisk with that, with a footnote. And that is one of those items which I mentioned on that you all received last week, this difference between the state and the feds. We are, as a state, a little tougher than the feds. We require, in the state of Georgia, that nobody would have a felony in the last 7 years. That is over and above that, and I think that is a very good thing. I certainly think we want to keep felons out of the business of mortgage loan origination. I think that's a very good thing that the department has done. And going further, they must demonstrate their financial responsibility and general fitness. They must score 75% or better on their test. Again, repeating, they have to take their 8 hours of continuing education every year, and they must maintain their licensure through the National Register. And that pretty much is the very, very brief overview of the bill, but I think that encompasses all the major points in it. But I certainly hope everybody has had the opportunity. If we could have the lights back up, if someone could flip those lights back up. We're done with the PowerPoint. But I hope everybody's had the opportunity over the weekend to review this bill and study it, and hope that we might have some good questions so we can answer them at this point.
Thank you, Chairman Hill. We appreciate that. This is a very important bill. Make sure we are in compliance with federal guidelines. And
Mr. Chairman, if I could, during the question, if I could go ahead and ask the Commissioner and Rod to come up and stand behind me, because I'm sure I'm going to have to defer to them more than once.
we would love to have them up there, and glad to have you here with us, Commissioner. We do have some questions for you, and Representative Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is it your intent to provide us with a copy of the Federal Safe Mortgage Licensing Act to see exactly what they are requiring prior to us voting on this?
We'd be more than happy to. It's again, that's why I passed this out last week, hoping some of these questions would be asked prior to this meeting. But we'll certainly be glad to provide one. That would be very easy to do.
Yeah, the reason I ask is because typically, whenever there's some federal mandate that comes down, the members never see what that mandate actually is, and we adopt legislation that goes beyond the mandate. And you actually have a constituent in your district who's being denied the right to drive because she does not have a Social Security number, something that federal law doesn't require, but an enactment that we made referencing a federal law that did not make that mandate. I just want to make sure we're not doing something.
No, we'll certainly provide you with that, and that's why we have already done that homework for you, because it is quite cumbersome. But we'll be more than happy to provide that to you and make sure we get that to you as soon as possible.
That would be nice. I've got a few other questions on line 38. Is that Regulation Z, Section 226.2A19?
what page are you referring to?
It's line 38.
Line 38.
Bill. Is that the Department of Banking and Finance's regulation?
No, that's a federal regulation.
Federal regulation.
That's federal regulation? All right. And are you aware on line 48, as we list federal banking agencies, that the Federal Reserve System is actually not an agency of the federal government, but is a privately owned banking cartel? And that they should probably be removed under the definition of agency.
Again, did that come from federal?
That is the model language. The Conference of State Bank Supervisors has been working with HUD to determine, to come up with model language for all 50 states to adopt, and that was the terminology worked out between that working group.
So that's not a mandate, using that language, it's not a mandate from the Federal Safe Mortgage Act?
It's a ruling, I guess, by HUD, an interpretation by HUD that they agree to, that they want in there, by definition.
I think that's why it would be really important for us to actually see the language itself in that federal statute before we move forward, because of interpretations that may not be exactly what the bill requires, since this is Georgia law we're looking at. On line 61, where we talk about clerical support duties may include, Chairman Hill, do you have any, do you believe it would be more incumbent upon this body to define what those duties specifically are, instead of just saying here's a partial list, and the list could just go on and on and on, and no one really know what those duties are until they get hit with a violation?
These are pretty much standard duties that you have, and if you remember, this is your person who is actually doing the clerical or support duties. This is not the person who is needing to be part of the licensing. So this is trying to define everything a secretary would do, for example. That's sometimes close to impossible to do. So we've listed their main jobs, but I don't know if you could actually include everything that this person does in their clerical or support duties. I mean, I don't know how that could be really further defined. I think we're getting into extreme minutia at that point.
All right, on lines, starting on line 332 through 335, the stricken language, where currently a natural person who purchases 5 or fewer mortgage loans in any one calendar year solely as an investment and who is not in the business of brokering, making, purchasing, or servicing mortgage loans is exempted. And so we're striking that exemption. What is your motivation for striking those who are not in the business of doing mortgages?
I'm going to have to again defer to the Commissioner.
The discussion with legal counsel, that may have been inadvertently stricken. It is not intended to be stricken.
Thank you. And
Well, let's stop there at that point. So I'd like to clarify that because it's before we move on.
Representative Franklin, you got a few more questions. I want to give other members opportunity too as well. So
yeah, I've got one more, just
Okay.
kind of general one
Okay.
after
Okay.
this one. Then I might have some more.
Okay, all right.
Since I'm only
Just
on
want to give the
page-
other members of the
I'm
committee an
only on page
opportunity.
10 here.
Yeah, just want to give other members of the committee an opportunity to ask questions too.
Thank you.
If I may, I'm going to hold the answer to that question for a few minutes while legal counsel gets us very clear. She's researching at this moment as to why that was done, and we'll give her a few moments if we may, Mr.
That'd be
Chairman.
fine. We'll look forward to getting the response to
Okay,
that
and
question.
And then one final question is really a little bit more foundational to the whole concept of what we're doing. Since what we're trying to do is incorporate a federal act. We took an oath before God to support the U.S. Constitution, and where we as states gave Congress authority to pass laws is found in Article 1, Section 8, as you know. And I, for the life of me, cannot find regulating the mortgage industry in the U.S. Constitution. And since we took a sacred oath to uphold this document, the U.S. Constitution, as well as our own, I'm just kind of wondering why we would give any credence to an unlawful enactment by the federal government.
Well, I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I'm not going to get into the constitutional questions, but it's my understanding that this is a federal law that was passed and is requiring our compliance for it, and if not, the consequences is HUD comes in and takes over this operation for us.
But isn't HUD basically mandating this anyway? So we're giving it to HUD one way or the other. So what's the difference?
The difference is really our implementation and management of the federal law. It's either we implement and manage the federal law, or they come in and implement it and manage it for us without any input from us at the state level. So
Okay.
that's my definition. Again, I'm not a constitutional lawyer. Don't pretend to be. I'm not a lawyer of any sort. So I wish I could give a better answer than that, but that's my answer for the committee.
Okay, Chairman Hill, thank you. I appreciate that, and appreciate you raising those questions. Representative Franklin, if you have some more, we'll come back to you in just a minute.
And at this moment, I do believe, are we ready to provide the answer? And ma'am, would you like to come around and provide it directly into the microphone? Rather than go through a third person here, we could might speed things up a little bit.
It's lines 332 to 335 that the question is on. Is that correct?
Come on in, please.
I talk awfully loud, so I
Well, but this is being recorded, so we must.
If you'll, for the members of the committee, identify yourself so we'll all know who you are as well, too.
Sure. My name is Judy Newberry. I'm the Deputy Commissioner for Legal and Consumer Affairs with the Banking Department. This provision simply, this doesn't relate back to the exemptions. The exemptions that are included in 7-1-1001, which did not change the folks that had to have licenses for being a broker or a mortgage lender. But in this particular provision, we've taken out language with regards to the natural person, because if a person meets the definition of a mortgage loan originator, which is defined in here, which it takes an application and then negotiates the terms, then that person, even if you're an individual using your own funds for investment purposes, you can't purchase, sell, or transfer without to or from the mortgage loan originator, mortgage broker, unless that person's licensed or exempt from licensure. Does that make any sense?
Let me make sure that, was it the intent of the commissioner to remove this language?
Well, that's what we're seeing.
Okay.
We've gone through this so much.
Okay.
This is very complicated, and I really feel for you in the fact that you have such a limited period of time to look at it, because we have been working on it for such a long period of time, trying to be sure that there aren't any conflicts between one provision and another provision. But I don't think that in this particular one that there is. Do you see?
And let me be clear, we appreciate you overseeing that and looking at that. We just do feel a sense of responsibility to.
And I certainly understand.
It is our responsibility to make judgment on these laws. So, you want to review that a little bit more, and let's go to some other questions. And how about that?
Yes.
Is that okay?
We will.
Since Chairman Hill was not able to answer my last question, could the department's attorney address that?
Well, let's go and let some other folks answer some questions first, and then we'll come back to that. How about that? Okay. Representative Shaw, I think you had some questions.
Yeah, thank you,
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Chairman.
Representative Shaw, can you hang on one second?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Well, Deputy Commissioner Rod Carnes, he's in charge of our non-depository financial institutions, the mortgage area, and he can explain.
I hope this will help. It says it shall be prohibited for any person. Now, a definition of a person is not a natural person. Like I said, it's a company. So it's saying that a company cannot do business with an unlicensed entity.
Okay.
If that helps clarify that. The natural person exemption is in the exemptions on line 2. Is it 242? So that 240, that exemption isn't any natural person, and there's a distinction between a natural person and a person.
Okay. Again, what I'm going to come down to the crux of the matter is, Commissioner, is this your intent to have that language in there or not?
That's correct. It would stay as is.
Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. Representative Shaw, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mine's fairly simple, but when we was going through the bullet points, Chairman Hill, you got all mortgage loan originators must be licensed or registered. In a lot of banks, you have loan originators that walk into the next office or right down the hall with the mortgage loan department. Does it make that loan originator, the person that actually said, we'll take you into your mortgage department, are they going to have to be licensed?
The person that is the employee of the bank would be registered. If you have a subcontractor working for you that is a mortgage broker or loan originator that the bank might be working with, that other person, if he is not an employee of the bank, would have to be licensed.
But the loan originator, let's say that works in-house, I mean the mortgage department, in-house in the bank.
Would just have to be registered.
Not the person that actually, the person walks into a loan office and say, I would like to talk about, you doing my home too, and he walks them down the hall. They are not required to be licensed.
Just the loan officer. And those other people would be doing the paperwork or introducing, but the loan officer. So in most instances, in most banks, you would have to have one person, perhaps in each branch, that would be registered and not licensed.
Well, that's
why the differential to keep from having some really onerous licensing on the banks through savings and loans.
Okay.
Is there a question? Representative Mayo, question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Commissioner, I recall maybe 4 years ago applying for a broker's license with your department, and it was a pretty lengthy application, and I believe it may have taken about 2 months for me to be approved and receive that broker's license. And from what I read here, and please clarify for me, if I as a broker today would like to hire an originator, that person in the past didn't have to be registered, nor did they have to be licensed. And I'm wondering why the rules don't apply to banks, why we don't have the same rules in place for banks when it comes to registering or licensing originators? Because the way I read this is that any employee of a mortgage broker now, any originator that I as a broker may decide to hire, would have to be licensed. Are they going to have to complete that same lengthy application that may take 2 months to be approved?
No, it's totally different standards to be a loan originator as opposed to a loan broker, or mortgage lender. But to answer your question, there is a difference regarding the bank loan officers versus the mortgage lenders loan officers or the mortgage brokers loan officers. As Chairman Hill mentioned, the bank's loan officers will be handled through the federal primary regulator, and because of their federal regulation, they will just have to be registered as opposed to receiving a loan originator license.
But
the process will not be a 2-month process for a loan originator.
Okay. But originators employed by brokers will have to be licensed as if they're brokers themselves.
No, there's a difference between a mortgage broker license and a loan originator's license.
Okay.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
At this point, may I interject with a minor change that we would want to have should this come out, and we want to come out as a substitute, which will help clarify a little bit of that. And if I may take you over to page 7, line 231. And if you'll see towards the end of that, under the underlined portion, it currently states, such natural person shall be subject to. And that isn't a really good definition, and I would like the committee to consider, should we be able to do this by substitute, to add the words between person and shall. So the words, who meets the definition of mortgage loan originator found at Code Section 7-1-1000, parens 22, parens. So it would now read in completion, such natural person who meets the definition of mortgage loan originator found at Code Section 7-1-1022 shall be subject to mortgage loan originator licensing requirements. That just ties it back to the full definition of a mortgage loan originator and clarifies that language completely in definition.
Okay, at the proper time, we'll take a look at in making that.
Thank you.
Can you read that one more time so we'll make sure
Yes. The addition would be after the word person and prior to the word shall,
right?
Who meets the definition of mortgage loan originator.
Okay, stop right there for a second.
I have this in writing. I could
Okay.
give it to it later if we would.
Okay.
Found at Code Section 7-1-1000, parens 22, parens.
Got it. Okay. Okay. The proper
Thank
time,
you
we'll
very
take a
much,
look at
Mr.
that.
Chairman.
Okay, we got some more questions.
We're ready.
Let's see, Representative Flood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Hill, just a question of clarification. On page 2, line 58, the definition of loan processor or underwriter is spelled out, and it implies that a loan officer or underwriter will not have to be licensed or registered. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the person, the clerical person who's actually doing the work for the loan originator.
Right. But then on line 90, we describe a mortgage underwriter, a mortgage lender, as someone who performs an underwriting function. And I just want to ensure that there's no conflict between someone who's an underwriter in one sense, who's not licensed, but a mortgage lender who is performing the same function as an underwriter is licensed.
I think the wording, as I see it, is fairly clear. For example, on line 64, they're doing the processing of underwriting, and that's the difference. The clerical person is doing the processing of the underwriter, or the processing of the paperwork, and the mortgage lender is, in fact, the underwriter, the legal person who is the underwriter. The other person is a clerical person that is processing the paperwork for the underwriter. But I'll defer to the legal minds to see if there's any differential in that.
I would have thought there was a distinction. The mortgage lender doesn't perform the underwriting is a financial analysis. Isn't that the case? Which would be different than the lender.
the term where it says loan processor or underwriter, sometimes those terms are used interchangeably, a loan processor, loan underwriter. And so that's why it goes on to clarify they're talking more of the clerical type duties. And then over here on the other section, they're talking about, like say, as Chairman Hill mentioned, the one who is actually underwriting the loan, who is determining the financial wherewithal of that individual versus the amount of loan they're seeking, that sort of thing.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions from other members of the committee? I know Representative Franklin, you had some more. We'll kind of see if some other folks have some. If not, Representative Franklin, did you have another question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask the department's attorney, being an attorney, where in Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution did the state of Georgia and the other states give the federal government authority to regulate the mortgage industry?
I don't know that it is in the Constitution. What I think that the situation that we're faced with today is that there is a federal law on the books that indicates that a state must enact legislation to effectuate or implement this federal regulation, or that the Housing and Urban Development will do it for us. So I suppose that's a choice that's in your hands.
Okay, thank you. We do have any other questions? Any members of the committee? Yes. Chairman Mills?
Mr. Chairman, I had a question, and I guess this is not a scare tactic question. This is a question for information. Could the department give us the most far-reaching scenario? Let's say we didn't pass this. What is the most far-reaching scenario that could take place to our constituents who are in this industry?
There's really two scenarios that could happen. One is that we don't pass legislation, or either we pass legislation that does not comply with HUD standards, and therefore HUD comes in and dictates the standards, and we don't know the cost that may be involved as well with HUD doing that, as well as, like say, it takes out. We would still license mortgage brokers and lenders, but we would have no control over the loan originators. The second scenario would be that we don't pass any legislation at all, and perhaps even some have stated perhaps HUD doesn't really want to step in, so they may not step in. Well, the other states that did pass this legislation, their mortgage brokers and lenders in those states could not do business with any Georgia mortgage broker or lender. They would be violating the law to do that. So Georgia would be an island unto itself, if you will, regarding the mortgage industry.
Follow up if I could. So, in other words, hypothetically, if we didn't pass this, HUD could say $5,000 fee for a license. They could say whatever number they want to pull out of the sky for our constituents in this industry. They could put regulations strict. Could they put regulations that were more strict on Georgia than other states?
It's conceivable they could do anything, Mr. Chairman. I don't know. They could, like say, the costs are unknown. I don't think HUD wants to have to step in. That's why they've been working so closely with the Conference of State Bank Supervisors to try to get all 50 states on board with compliant language. But if they do, I would think there could be, repercussions.
And I guess if I could, with one last question,
yes, sir,
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Could you give us a couple of examples? Because as I read the bill, it seems like there's a place or two that Georgia law is actually, I think, based on more sound fiscal policy than the federal law in areas that we require people involved in the mortgage industry that the federal government does not require.
That's correct. And the main area is in regard to the felon situation. The way the HUD law or the federal law came out, if you can't have a felon over the last 7 years, and in certain cases, depending if it's dealt with financial industry, that sort of thing, it goes back longer. Well, Georgia has had a long-standing policy and law regulation that does not allow any felon in the mortgage industry. Primarily, as you know, for years we were number one in mortgage fraud in the country, and so that would be one change from the mandate. We're not wanting to lower our standards on the loan originators to allow them, a felon, back in the industry after 7 years, when we don't allow their employers, the mortgage brokers and the mortgage lenders, to be in the industry after 7 years. So that is the main area of difference. As well as to keep that connection and responsibility, we require that they be W-2 employees. That way you can't offload responsibility and liability. If someone is doing bad, they say, well, it's not an employee, that was just a contractor I hired, don't take any offense on me. We feel that there should be that tie-in, that responsibility back to the employer. If you're hiring evildoers, wrongdoers, felons, then you need to be responsible. So those are the two main areas.
And I'm sorry, I said one more.
Chairman
I
Mills,
misspoke.
you can speak as long as you want.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just think that is a very, very important point for us to consider as we move forward in this process. I just want to reemphasize that, and Commissioner, I want you to make sure that I state this correctly. If we don't move forward with some legislation that includes language that we currently have in Georgia, which says if you've had a felon, you can't be in this line of work. Under the federal legislation, you could have been a felon 7 years back and still get back in the loan in business. And that's the kind of thing that we've tried to prevent here in Georgia. So I just want to make sure the committee understands that and that I've got a good grasp of it.
That's absolutely correct. And as you know, real quickly, in 2003, we went to a risk-focused examination of the mortgage industry because we had been number one in mortgage fraud for years. And since we've done that, we've consistently started dropping in the rankings, and we've got something today that it looks like lists the top 10, and we're not in there. So it's working, but there's still numerous people that are doing wrong in the industry. We have a priority list to go to that's almost 20 pages long of entities that we still want to get into because we have suspicions or concerns about those. This law, this whole thing came about to try to address some of that. So a bad player can't go from point A to point B, employer A to employer B, from state A to state B, that sort of thing. So that's what this is to address. You're absolutely right.
Thank you, Chairman Mills. Chairman Scott, you had moved.
Chairman,
move for
at the
motion.
appropriate time, I'd like to make a motion for due pass for this bill, and also make a motion for an amendment.
All right. Why don't we take the amendment first? We'll go move them.
All right.
What's your motion?
The amendment that I would like to offer to the bill, with the committee's permission, is on page 7, line 231. After the words "such natural person," insert the following words: who meets the definition of mortgage loan originator found in Code Section 7-1-1000.22.
Okay.
And then continuing on as is.
Okay, just for confirmation, we'll just confirm that is the language that you...
That would be parens 22, just to be consistent technically.
Sorry, I stand corrected.
Okay. Okay, we have a motion on the table. Do we have a second? Do we have a second? Okay, thank you. All those in favor of this amendment, confirm by saying aye.
Aye.
Those no. Okay, the ayes have it, so the amendment is passed.
I just named myself President of the United States, actually.
Passed that a lot of people maybe weren't entirely clear on and they didn't vote on.
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
I mean, were there a lot of ayes? And I just,
Well, no.
okay.
Okay. We'll make it clear to the committee that what the amendment was to make a recommendation that the change to the language that was proposed by the author of the bill and the banking commissioner. This is the amendment that was proposed by them. Is there any question or comment on the amendment by any members of the committee? Otherwise, we will move forward with the substitute with the amendment in there in the bill, LC 34-2078. Is there, yes, Representative Franklin? Yes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I might have misunderstood Chairman Hill saying that he would be willing to get us a copy of that Federal Safe Mortgage Licensing Act so we could make sure that we're not doing something thinking that we're required to that we're not before we took action.
And my intention, Representative Franklin, is that we would have that before it would be voted on again at the big Bankings Committee. And Chairman Hill, can you assure us that we will have that before this comes before the big?
They'll work on it and try and get it out to
Before it comes
soon
before
by
the-
tomorrow at the very latest. And
We'll be able to discuss it again at the full committee
on your desk.
at that point.
Those questions might be answered at the full
Okay.
committee meeting. Should there be a differential?
Okay.
That's significant.
Okay. Representative Scott, do you have a motion?
Motion do pass on HB 312, LC 342078,
As amended.
as amended, and waive print.
And, all right, we have a motion and a second for due pass. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No?
Okay, the ayes have it. We appreciate Commissioner and Chairman Hill and all your work on this when this committee is adjourned.
Thank you so much. And
Yes, ma'am.
the housing, we'll probably bring that up.
I tell you, Representative Hassan, since we adjourned, you may want to
Come up
just ask
with an
him
alternate-
in private.